Sign these." Ethan thrust divorce papers into Naomi's trembling hands. The cemetery workers were still covering her mother's casket with earth. The pastor's final prayer still hung in the cold air. She was breastfeeding their 3-week-old son against her chest. "Sign them now, Naomi." His voice cut through the mourner's whispers like winter steel. Vanessa Reed stood at his shoulder, perfectly manicured hand resting on his arm, eyes glistening with manufactured sympathy. Behind them, colleagues from his firm watched with barely concealed satisfaction. Some held their phones low, recording. Naomi's tears fell onto the papers as she signed, right there beside her mother's grave. The headstone read, "Beloved Mother," in fresh letters. She lost her mother, her marriage, and her dignity in the span of 72 hours. But Ethan Caldwell made one fatal miscalculation. He had no idea who Ruth Walker really was. He had no idea what she'd spent 20 years building in silence. And he had absolutely no idea that heaven keeps perfect records of every tear shed in faith. Before we witness the reckoning, we need to understand how a billionaire's arrogance became his downfall. But first, subscribe to this channel, like and share this video to your fellow story lovers. Make sure you follow this story to the very end, because what unfolds next will restore your faith in divine timing. The kind of reversal that only God can orchestrate. Now, let's go back to where faith and cruelty first collided. 3 years earlier, Ruth Walker sat across from her daughter at their small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. The morning light filtered through lace curtains, casting patterns on the worn wooden surface where 3 generations of women had shared their secrets. "Mama," Ethan proposed. Naomi had said it with such joy, holding out her hand to show the ring modest by billionaire standards, but sparkling nonetheless. Ruth had looked at her daughter's glowing face and felt the Holy Spirit whisper a warning she couldn't ignore. She took Naomi's hand gently. "Baby, let me tell you something my mother told me," and her mother told her. "A man who loves you won't rush you. A man who values you won't try to separate you from your roots. And a man who truly sees you won't need you to become smaller so he can feel bigger." Naomi had laughed it off then. "Mama, you worry too much. He's successful, ambitious. He wants a partner." Ruth had smiled sadly. "I'm not worried, baby. I'm prepared. There's a difference." What Naomi didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Ruth Walker had been preparing for years. Not just spiritually, though she spent hours in prayer each morning before dawn. Not just emotionally, though she'd watched her own mother lose everything to a man who promised forever and delivered abandonment. Ruth had been preparing legally, financially, strategically, because Ruth Walker wasn't just a praying woman. She was a praying woman who'd spent 2 decades building something in absolute silence. Real estate investments made under a trust Naomi had never heard of. Business partnerships structured through advisors Naomi had never met. Assets carefully moved, protected, positioned. Every Sunday after church, while Naomi thought her mother was meeting with the finance committee, Ruth was actually sitting in conference rooms with estate attorneys, tax specialists, and financial advisors who'd signed ironclad NDAs. She'd learned young that faith without wisdom is just hope, and hope without action is just wishing. The instructions she left were specific. Everything would be sealed until after her burial. Not before. Not during. After. When grief was fresh and predators were confident. When her daughter would be at her lowest and most vulnerable, that's when heaven's answer would arrive. Ruth had even chosen her trustees carefully: Pastor Marcus Chen, who'd known Naomi since she was 6 years old, and Elizabeth Okonkwo, a financial advisor who understood both compound interest and spiritual warfare. If anyone tries to access this before the burial, Ruth had written in her final instructions, "Deny them. My daughter must walk through the valley first." That's where faith is forged. But back at the cemetery, standing in the cold with divorce papers in one hand and her nursing son in the other, Naomi knew none of this. She believed she had lost everything. Her mother, her marriage, her home, because Ethan's lawyers had already drafted documents claiming the house was his premarital asset. Her security, her future. That first night after the burial, Naomi sat in a budget motel room her cousin had paid for, watching her son sleep in a portable crib. She had $300 in her purse. No access to joint accounts, Ethan had frozen them. No family home to return to, it was being prepared for estate sale. She opened her Bible to Psalm 27, a passage her mother had made her memorize as a child. "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Hope you're comfortable. You should do the same with whatever you have left." Attached was a photo. Ethan and Vanessa at some upscale restaurant. Champagne glasses raised. Her hand with its massive engagement ring prominently displayed. Naomi's hands shook with rage, grief, humiliation. She wanted to throw the phone. She wanted to call him and scream. She wanted to post her own response, expose him, hurt him back. Instead, she put the phone face down and knelt beside her son's crib. "God, I don't understand this. I don't understand why you let him do this at Mama's grave. I don't understand what I'm supposed to do now. But Mama taught me that your silence isn't absence. So I'm going to trust you, even when it makes no sense." The next morning, Pastor Marcus called. "Naomi, I know this is difficult, but I need you to come to the church office when you can. There are some things your mother wanted me to discuss with you. Legal matters." Legal matters. Naomi assumed it was about funeral expenses she couldn't pay. She almost didn't go. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan moved Vanessa into his penthouse with theatrical efficiency. He gave an interview to a tech magazine about his new relationship, carefully crafted to make him look like a man who'd escaped a suffocating marriage. He updated his social media relationship status. He made sure everyone in his circle knew. He was free, powerful, and moving forward. His business partners congratulated him on his clean exit strategy. His lawyers praised his timing. Vanessa praised his decisiveness. No one mentioned the optics of divorcing your wife at her mother's funeral. Or maybe they did, and Ethan simply didn't care. Pride has a way of making cruelty look like strength. He told Vanessa over wine that night, "She'll be fine. Eventually. Naomi's resilient. She'll find some regular guy. Live some regular life. That's more her speed anyway." What he meant was, she's beneath me now. And she always was. But in a corner office downtown, in a law firm Naomi had never heard of, a senior partner named Theodore Hartwell opened a sealed file marked Walker Estate, open only after burial. He read through the document slowly, twice, making notes. Then he picked up his phone and called Pastor Marcus. "It's time," he said simply. "Bring her in tomorrow. And Marcus, make sure she's sitting down when we tell her." The envelope sat on Theodore's desk, embossed with Ruth Walker's initials, containing documents that would change everything. But it would wait one more day, because timing, as Ruth had written in her final letter, is everything in God's economy. "He prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Ruth had underlined that verse in her Bible 17 times. Tomorrow, the table would be set. Tonight, Ethan Caldwell slept peacefully, certain of his victory. And Naomi Walker Caldwell wept prayers into her pillow, certain of nothing except that her mother's God was still sovereign, even when he seemed silent. Especially then. The conference room smelled like old books and lemon polish. Naomi sat in a leather chair that seemed too big for her, still wearing the same black dress from 3 days ago. Her son slept in a carrier against her chest. She'd brought him because she had nowhere else to leave him. Pastor Marcus sat to her left, his presence steadying. Across the mahogany table, Theodore Hartwell adjusted his glasses and slid a folder toward her. "Miss Walker, your mother was a remarkable woman." Naomi nodded, not trusting her voice. Theodore opened the folder carefully, like he was handling something sacred. "What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. Your mother spent 23 years building an empire in complete silence. Real estate holdings across 7 states. Investment portfolios managed by some of the most discreet financial advisors in the country. Business partnerships structured to generate passive income while maintaining total privacy. Naomi stared at him. My mother worked as a church administrator. She drove a 15-year-old Honda. Theodore smiled. Yes, she did. Because Ruth Walker understood something. Most wealthy people never learn. Real power doesn't announce itself. It prepares. He slid documents across the table. Property deeds, trust agreements, investment statements. The numbers blurred together until one figure came into focus, typed in bold at the bottom of a summary sheet. Total estate value, $400 million. Naomi's hands went numb. That's not possible. It's not only possible, Miss Walker, it's yours. Your mother structured everything through the Ruth Walker Foundation. You are the majority controller. 70% ownership. The remaining 30% is divided between charitable trusts she established for education and housing initiatives. The room tilted. Naomi looked at Pastor Marcus, desperate for this to make sense. He took her hand. Your mother told me 5 years ago, Marcus, if anything happens to me, Naomi's going to need to know she's not alone. God provided this. Not for luxury. For protection. For purpose. Naomi couldn't breathe. $400 million. While Ethan was texting her photos of champagne celebrations, she was sitting on $400 million. Theodore continued, his voice gentle but firm. There are conditions. The foundation must maintain its charitable mission. You cannot liquidate more than 15% in any given year, and everything remains confidential unless you choose to disclose it. Your mother was very specific. This is not for show. This is for impact. Naomi looked down at her sleeping son. Her mother had done this, built this, protected this, prayed over this, all while driving that old Honda and clipping coupons and teaching Naomi that faithfulness in little things leads to authority over much. She stood up slowly, walked to the window overlooking the city, and did the only thing that made sense. She knelt, right there in the law office, with lawyers and pastors watching. Naomi knelt and wept. Not from relief, not from excitement. From the overwhelming weight of answered prayer she hadn't even known to pray. God, you saw her. You saw every sacrifice, every quiet investment, every moment. She chose wisdom over comfort. Thank you for seeing me too. When she finally stood, something in her had shifted. Not arrogance, clarity. Theodore, I need you to keep this completely confidential. No announcements, no press releases, nothing. He nodded approvingly. Your mother said you'd say that. Over the next 6 months, Naomi transformed in ways no one could see from the outside. She moved into a modest townhouse, not the penthouse she could afford, but something safe and quiet. She hired Elizabeth Okonkwo as her primary financial advisor and began meeting with her twice a week, learning everything her mother had known. She studied investment strategies, tax structures, philanthropic impact. She attended foundation board meetings, listened more than she spoke, and slowly began to understand the machinery her mother had built. She also went to therapy. Processed grief, processed betrayal, learned to separate her worth from Ethan's cruelty, and she prayed. Every morning before her son woke up, Naomi prayed the same prayer. God, make me wise. Not vindictive, not showy. Wise. The outside world saw a single mother struggling. The truth was a woman being refined. Meanwhile, Ethan's world developed fractures. It started small. A deal with a European tech firm that suddenly went cold. Investors who stopped returning calls as quickly. A board meeting where someone questioned his judgment for the first time in years. Then Vanessa began to show her true nature. Where Naomi had been content with quiet evenings, Vanessa demanded constant spectacle. 5-star restaurants, exotic vacations, designer everything. She wanted the billionaire lifestyle she'd signed up for, and she wanted it now. You're distracted, she complained over dinner one night. Your head's not in the game, Ethan snapped. Maybe, if you understood business instead of just spending money, you'd know deals take time. The fights increased. Vanessa's demands escalated. and Ethan's patience evaporated. His colleagues noticed. His focus was slipping. His legendary calm was replaced by irritability. During one conference call, he lost his temper so badly that a partner muted him and suggested he take a break. The man who'd been praised for his decisiveness was now being managed like a liability. Vanessa pushed harder. "When are we getting engaged? When are you making this official? When am I getting what you promised?" Ethan realized with growing horror that he'd traded a woman who wanted nothing for a woman who wanted everything. One evening, his lawyer called. "Ethan, something strange is happening. Some of the investors are asking questions about your divorce, specifically about the timing. There's concern about your judgment." "It's fine," Ethan said tightly. "Everything was legal." "Legal isn't the same as wise," the lawyer replied. Ethan hung up and poured himself a drink. Across town, Naomi sat in a foundation strategy meeting, asking intelligent questions about housing development projects and educational initiatives. Her voice was steady. Her mind was clear. Her spirit was anchored. The contrast was stark. The man who'd claimed power was unraveling, while the woman he'd discarded was becoming formidable. 2 weeks later, Ethan received an email marked urgent. An invitation to a closed-door investors meeting. The subject line read, "Strategic Restructuring Discussion. Mandatory Attendance." He scanned the attendee list. Names he recognized. Senior partners, major stakeholders, people who could make or break his position. What he didn't notice was a name buried in the CC line, listed as a foundation representative. Naomi R. Walker, Majority Controller, Ruth Walker Foundation. He deleted the email and poured another drink, completely unaware that the table had already been prepared, and judgment was about to be served. The boardroom was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A table so polished you could see your reflection in it. Leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Ethan Caldwell walked in, wearing his most expensive suit, radiating the confidence of a man who'd never lost a power play. He nodded at familiar faces. Senior partners, major investors, people who'd watched him build an empire. He took his usual seat at the table's head. "That seat's actually reserved, Mr. Caldwell." The facilitator, a woman Ethan didn't recognize, gestured to a chair further down. "If you could sit here, please." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he moved. First sign of disrespect. He made a mental note to find out who authorized this. The door opened again. More investors filed in. Then attorneys. Then someone Ethan definitely didn't expect. Pastor Marcus Chen. "What is this?" Ethan muttered to the partner beside him. The man didn't meet his eyes. "Restructuring discussion. You'll see." The facilitator stood at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss a significant shift in investment structure and partnership alignments. As you know, the Caldwell Tech portfolio has been seeking expansion capital for the European markets." Ethan straightened. Finally. This was about his deal. "We've had several offers, but one stood out. Not because of the amount, though it's substantial, but because of the vision alignment and ethical structure." The room went quiet. "The offer comes from the Ruth Walker Foundation." Ethan's mind went blank. Ruth Walker, his dead ex-mother-in-law. That made no sense. "The foundation controls approximately $400 million in liquid assets," the facilitator continued. "And they've expressed interest in strategic partnerships with companies that demonstrate strong ethical leadership and community impact." One of the senior partners cleared his throat. "Which brings us to our concern, Ethan. Several of us have become aware of certain circumstances regarding your recent divorce." Ethan's blood went cold. Specifically, the timing and location of the divorce proceedings. At a burial, while your then-wife was nursing your child. The partner's voice was measured but hard. "That's not just poor judgment. It's a character issue that affects this firm's reputation." Another investor jumped in. "We've also received reports about your behavior in recent months. Erratic decision-making, anger management concerns." A very public relationship that's generating negative press. Ethan's hands gripped the armrests. This is ridiculous. My personal life has nothing to do with my business performance. Actually, it has everything to do with it. The facilitator pulled up a presentation. Because the Ruth Walker Foundation has made their investment contingent on leadership restructuring, they've specifically requested that you be removed from primary decision-making authority. The room spun. And before you object, the facilitator continued, you should know who's making that request. The door at the far end of the boardroom opened. Naomi walked in. Not the broken woman from the cemetery. Not the sobbing wife signing papers at a grave. This Naomi wore a tailored navy suit. Her hair was pulled back elegantly. She carried herself with quiet authority. She held a leather portfolio in one hand. Behind her walked Theodore Hartwell and Elizabeth Okonkwo. Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Naomi took the seat at the head of the table, the seat Ethan had been denied. She set down her portfolio, folded her hands, and looked directly at her ex-husband. Her voice was steady. Hello, Ethan. The room was absolutely silent. Pastor Marcus spoke first. For those who don't know, this is Naomi Walker, daughter of Ruth Walker and majority controller of the Ruth Walker Foundation. She's here to discuss terms. Ethan found his voice, though it came out strangled. You're behind this? Naomi's expression didn't change. My mother was behind this. She spent 23 years building something you didn't know existed. She built it quietly, wisely, prayerfully. She built it specifically to protect me from moments exactly like the one you created at her grave. One of the investors gasped softly. You divorced her at the funeral? Ethan's face flushed red. That was a private matter. You made it public, Naomi said calmly. You chose that location, that timing, in front of witnesses. While I was grieving and nursing our son, you chose cruelty over compassion because you believed I had nothing. You were wrong. She opened her portfolio and slid documents across the table. The Ruth Walker Foundation is prepared to invest $75 million in restructured leadership. But not with you in charge, Ethan. The foundation invests in character, not just capital, and your character has been found wanting. The words hit like physical blows. Theodore spoke up. The terms are non-negotiable. Mr. Caldwell transitions to an advisory role with no operational authority. The board implements new ethical oversight. And the foundation gets representation in all major decisions. Ethan looked around the table desperately. You're going to let her do this? I built this company. I made you all money. The senior partner who'd questioned him earlier leaned forward. And you embarrassed us all with that stunt at the cemetery. The moment that video hit social media, we became a liability. You did this to yourself. Video? Ethan's voice cracked. Naomi nodded. Several people recorded it. It's been circulating privately. Your colleagues have seen it. Investors have seen it. The man who handed divorce papers to his grieving, nursing wife at her mother's burial. That's your legacy now. The room seemed to tilt. Everything Ethan had built, everything he'd controlled, was slipping away. And the woman he'd destroyed was orchestrating it with surgical precision. Vanessa, who'd been texting in the waiting area, walked past the boardroom window. She glanced in, saw Ethan's face, saw the power dynamics, and kept walking. She didn't even pause. Ethan watched her go and understood with crushing clarity. She'd never loved him, just like he'd never truly loved Naomi. The difference was that Naomi had offered genuine devotion, and he'd rejected it. Vanessa had offered performance, and he'd paid for it. Now both were gone. Naomi stood, preparing to leave. She looked at Ethan one final time. I forgive you for what you did. Not because you deserve it, but because my mother taught me that unforgiveness is a prison I won't live in. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It means I'm free. She walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Ethan? My mother left me a letter. She said to tell you something if we ever met again. She paused, making sure he was listening. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. She prayed you'd learn that before it was too late. I hope you finally do. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Ethan sat in the ruins of his empire, surrounded by men who'd once admired him and now looked at him with barely concealed disgust. The papers in front of him detailed his demotion, his humiliation, his fall. Outside, Naomi stood in the hallway and took a deep breath. Pastor Marcus joined her. "You okay?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I am. For the first time in a long time, I really am." Across town, in a townhouse that was modest by choice rather than necessity, Naomi's son was being watched by a trusted nanny. Soon, Naomi would go home, hold him, and thank God for the protection she hadn't known she needed. She'd knelt at a grave, broken and defeated. She'd signed papers with shaking hands while her mother's casket was lowered into the ground. She'd spent nights weeping, believing she'd lost everything. But God's silence had never been absence. It had been preparation. The table had been set in the presence of her enemies. And justice, as her mother always said, belongs to the Lord. Naomi walked out of that building with her head high, her spirit anchored, and her future secure. Not because of money, but because she'd learned what her mother had always known. Real power isn't loud. It's patient. It's prayerful. It's prepared. And it always answers to something higher than itself.